I'm Josiah Reed, 34 years old and CEO of a cybersecurity company most people have never heard of. Last Thanksgiving, I arrived late at my parents' colonial-style home in Brookline. I barely had one arm out of my jacket when my father looked up from the dining table and announced, "Didn't know they let dropouts in here." A few relatives chuckled. My mother smiled awkwardly. I just nodded, hung my jacket, and took a seat at the far end of the table. Little did they know how everything would change when my brother-in-law realized who really signed his paychecks. Before I tell you how my entire family discovered who I really am, let me know where you're watching from, and subscribe if you've ever been underestimated by people who should have believed in you. Growing up in Brookline, Massachusetts meant living in one of Boston's most affluent suburbs. Our street was lined with historic homes, perfectly manicured lawns, and families obsessed with where their children would attend college. In the Reed household, education wasn't just important, it was everything. My father, William Reed, was a tenured economics professor at a prestigious university, known for his ruthless grading and biting criticism of underperforming students. At home, he applied the same standards. My mother, Laura, was a cardiothoracic surgeon whose 16-hour workdays didn't prevent her from expecting academic perfection from her children. My older sister Amelia was the golden child, straight A's through school, perfect SAT scores, and acceptance to medical school at 21. She followed directly in our mother's footsteps, eventually becoming a medical researcher specializing in experimental treatments for rare diseases. My older brother Lucas was nearly as impressive, earning his law degree and landing a position at one of Boston's oldest corporate law firms before his 26th birthday. Then there was me. From kindergarten, I struggled with sitting still, focusing on worksheets, and the structured environment of traditional education. My mind worked differently. I could spend hours building complex structures with building blocks, or taking apart electronics to understand their inner workings. But memorizing state capitals or multiplication tables felt impossible. By third grade, my teachers began suggesting I might have attention issues. My report cards were filled with comments like, "Josiah is extremely bright, but cannot focus, and shows exceptional problem-solving skills when interested in the subject." My father dismissed these observations as excuses for laziness. "There's nothing wrong with you, except lack of discipline," he told me repeatedly. "Your brother and sister managed to pay attention just fine." When I turned 13, a school psychologist finally convinced my parents to have me professionally evaluated. The diagnosis was clear: ADHD, combined with some learning differences that made traditional education particularly challenging for me. The doctor recommended medication, accommodations at school, and a different approach to learning. My father's response? "We're not drugging our son because he doesn't try hard enough." Despite the diagnosis, little changed at home. The nightly interrogations about homework continued. Family dinners remained intellectual battlegrounds where my father would quiz us on current events, historical facts, or scientific concepts. While my siblings thrived under the pressure, I would freeze, forget facts I actually knew, or blurt out half-formed answers that earned me looks of disapproval. My mother tried in her own way, hiring tutors and specialists to fix what she saw as deficiencies. One summer, I had to spend 4 hours daily with a stern retired teacher who rapped my knuckles with a ruler when my attention wandered. Another time, my parents sent me to an academic boot camp that promised to instill discipline in underachieving students. Computers became my refuge. I taught myself programming languages, built my first website at 14, and even developed a simple app that helped me organize my thoughts and assignments in a way that made sense to my brain. When I showed it to my father, hoping for approval, he glanced at it and said, "If you put this much effort into your actual schoolwork, you might not be failing algebra." Somehow, I managed to graduate high school not with honors like my siblings, but with a decent enough GPA to get accepted to the state university. My parents' disappointment was palpable. They'd expected Harvard, Yale, or at least their own alma maters. Instead, I would be attending what my father called a backup school for underachievers. College started promisingly enough. The freedom of university life suited me better than high school's rigid structure. I found a few like-minded friends in the computer science department. For the first time, I met people who thought like me, who saw the world as systems and solutions rather than memorized facts and regurgitated information. But the core requirements, literature, history, mandatory economics at my father's insistence, still felt like trudging through quicksand. My grades in these courses plummeted despite hours in the library. The more I struggled, the more my confidence eroded. By the middle of sophomore year, I was on academic probation, depressed, and questioning my worth as a person. The turning point came in an unexpected form. A flyer for the campus entrepreneurship club caught my eye. They were hosting a hackathon, a 48-hour event where students would build tech solutions to real-world problems. I signed up on impulse. Those 48 hours changed everything. Fueled by energy drinks and passion, I built a security protocol that identified potential data breaches in real time. The judges, actual tech industry veterans, were impressed enough to award me first place and connect me with local startups. For the first time, my brain's unique wiring felt like an asset rather than a liability. 2 weeks later, I made the hardest decision of my life. I dropped out of college to pursue my own tech venture. I called my parents on a Sunday evening to tell them, "You're throwing away your future," my father said, voice cold with fury. "No Reed has ever failed to complete their education." "I'm not failing to complete it," I tried to explain. "I'm choosing a different path." "There is no different path," he shouted. "There's success or failure, and you're choosing failure." My mother got on the phone, tears in her voice. "Josiah, please reconsider. We only want what's best for you. Without a degree, what kind of life will you have?" The conversation ended with an ultimatum: return to school, or no longer consider myself part of the family. In their minds, they were using tough love to prevent me from ruining my life. In reality, they were severing the already frayed connection between us. I didn't return to school, and as promised, I was essentially disowned. No financial support, no phone calls, no visits. The only acknowledgement of my existence came in the form of obligatory invitations to major holidays, which I initially declined and, in later years, attended briefly out of a sense of duty rather than connection. The first year after dropping out was brutal. My dorm room had been my home, and suddenly I had nowhere to live. I couch-surfed with friends from the entrepreneurship club, sleeping on floors and in basements while trying to build my first company. I survived on ramen noodles, free pizza at tech meetups, and the occasional meal bought by a sympathetic friend. During this period, I worked 3 jobs: morning shifts at a coffee shop, evening tech support at an electronics store, and weekend gigs fixing computers for small businesses. Between shifts, I coded relentlessly, developing the security protocol I'd started at the hackathon into something more robust. My big break came at a regional tech conference I'd scraped together enough money to attend. Unable to afford the networking dinner, I was sitting alone in the venue lobby, coding on my laptop, when an older gentleman sat down beside me. "That's an interesting approach to encryption," he commented, glancing at my screen. His name was Garrett Thompson, a former security specialist for a major tech company who now invested in promising startups. For 2 hours, we discussed cybersecurity challenges, my algorithmic approach, and the growing threats facing corporations. By the end of our conversation, he handed me his business card. "You've got something special, kid. Call me Monday. I think we should talk about seed funding." With Garrett's initial investment of $50,000, I founded my first real company. We called it Secure Node, focusing on identifying vulnerabilities in business networks. The business model was solid, but my inexperience showed. I hired friends rather than professionals, mismanaged our limited funds, and failed to properly market our services. 18 months later, we were bankrupt. Most people would consider this a failure. I saw it as an expensive education, more valuable than any college course. I analyzed every mistake, learned from each misstep, and immediately began planning my next venture. Garrett, despite losing his investment, saw my potential and remained a mentor. Thomas Edison failed thousands of times before inventing the light bulb, he reminded me. "You've failed exactly once. You're ahead of schedule." For the next 2 years, I worked around the clock. During days, I consulted for small tech firms to pay rent on my tiny studio apartment. Nights were dedicated to developing a revolutionary approach to cybersecurity, an algorithm that could predict attack vectors before breaches occurred, rather than simply responding to them. The breakthrough came during a 36-hour coding marathon, fueled by nothing but determination and energy drinks. I created a self-learning system that analyzed patterns across seemingly unrelated data points to identify potential security threats. The approach was fundamentally different from anything on the market. With my prototype complete, Garrett helped arrange meetings with potential investors. The first 5 rejected me outright, uncomfortable with my lack of credentials. "Come back when you finish your degree," one told me dismissively. The 6th meeting changed everything. The venture capitalist, a self-made tech entrepreneur named Veronica Chambers, didn't care about my educational background, she cared about results. After a rigorous technical evaluation of my algorithm, she offered $2 million in funding, and Quantum Shield Technologies was born. We started small, just me and 3 employees in a converted warehouse space. Our first client was a mid-sized retail chain that had recently suffered a devastating data breach. Our system identified 16 potential vulnerabilities their existing security had missed. When we prevented a major attack 3 months later, word began to spread. Within 2 years, we had expanded to 30 employees and moved to a proper office in a glass and steel high-rise. By year 3, we had 100 employees and clients across 3 continents. Year 4 brought acquisition of 2 smaller security firms and expansion into artificial intelligence-driven threat assessment. Somewhere along the way, we opened an office in the same city where my sister Amelia had settled with her new husband. I hadn't planned this. It was simply where talent was available and operating costs were reasonable. I had no idea her husband Nathan worked for a financial services company until much later, when we acquired their technology provider and he became, technically, my employee. Throughout this growth, I maintained a deliberately low public profile. In an industry obsessed with celebrity CEOs and flashy personalities, I chose privacy. Our website listed me simply as J.R. Reed, founder and CEO. We released no photographs. I declined speaking engagements and magazine profiles. This wasn't just about avoiding family attention. I genuinely believed our work should speak for itself. By the time of that fateful Thanksgiving dinner, Quantum Shield Technologies employed over 500 people globally and was valued at approximately $200 million. We had offices in 7 cities, clients ranging from small businesses to Fortune 500 corporations, and a reputation for excellence in the cybersecurity world. My personal finances had similarly transformed. The kid who once couldn't afford a networking dinner now owned a penthouse apartment overlooking the city, had investments worth tens of millions, and could purchase pretty much anything I wanted. Yet my lifestyle remained relatively modest. I drove a practical electric car rather than a flashy sports model. My wardrobe consisted of comfortable, quality basics rather than designer labels. I lived well but quietly, finding more satisfaction in building something meaningful than in displaying wealth. Throughout these years of growth and success, my family remained distant. Holiday cards were exchanged, but little else. They never asked about my career beyond vague inquiries about whether I was still doing computer stuff. I never volunteered information about my success, partly from pride, and partly from the lingering hope that someday they might value me for who I was, rather than what I had achieved. That hope, buried but never extinguished, is what led me to accept my mother's Thanksgiving invitation after years of brief, awkward holiday appearances or outright absence. The call from my mother came on a Tuesday morning in early November. I was reviewing acquisition documents for a promising startup when my assistant mentioned my mother was on the line. I almost declined the call. Our conversations were typically brief and superficial, but something made me pick up. "Josiah," my mother said, her voice carrying its usual mix of formality and restraint. "I'm calling about Thanksgiving." I braced myself for the standard invitation I typically declined, or accepted only to make a brief appearance. "We'd like you to come this year," she continued. "The whole family will be there. Amelia's bringing her new husband. I don't think you've met him yet. Nathan works in finance. Very successful." The The subtle emphasis on successful wasn't lost on me, a reminder of what I supposedly wasn't. "I'll check my calendar," I said noncommittally. "It would mean a lot to your father and me," she added, a rare hint of genuine emotion in her voice. After hanging up, I sat at my desk, turning the invitation over in my mind. Part of me wanted to decline as usual, to protect myself from the inevitable judgment and comparison. Another part, perhaps the hopeful child still lurking somewhere inside the successful adult, wondered if things could be different this time. That evening, I called my closest friend Maya for advice. We'd met during my couch surfing days when she'd offered her futon for 3 days max that turned into 3 months. Despite my ability to now offer her anything in return, she refused all gifts except occasional dinners and our traditional Christmas exchange. "They're your family, Joe," she said after I explained my dilemma. "But you're not the same person who used to let their disapproval crush you. You've built something amazing with or without their validation." "I'm not going to announce my success like some prodigal son," I told her. "If I go, it's just to be present, not to prove anything." "Then maybe that's your answer," she replied. "Go as yourself, the whole self you've become. No grand revelations, no hiding either. Just be Josiah." After considering it for several days, I RSVP'd affirmatively to my mother's increasingly persistent messages. I arranged for my executive team to handle operations during my absence and cleared my calendar for the 4-day weekend. As Thanksgiving approached, my anxiety grew. I found myself having stress dreams about failing exams, a recurring nightmare from my college days. During my morning runs, I rehearsed potential conversations, preparing responses to the inevitable questions about my life and career. The morning of Thanksgiving arrived with unseasonably cold weather and a light dusting of snow. I dressed carefully in clothes that walked the line between professional and casual dark jeans, a charcoal sweater over a button-down, and leather boots. Nothing flashy, no designer labels, but quality pieces that suited me. I considered taking my everyday electric sedan rather than my rarely used sports car, wanting to avoid any appearance of showing off. In the end, I decided to just be myself, no pretense, no performance, no hiding. The drive to my parents' home took 90 minutes, each mile bringing back memories of earlier returns. The first holiday after dropping out, when I'd arrived on a bus, wearing my only decent shirt. The Thanksgiving 5 years ago, when I'd left after 20 minutes following my uncle's suggestion that I might qualify for an entry-level position at his friend's computer repair shop. I had planned to arrive exactly at the scheduled 3 o'clock dinner time, hoping to minimize awkward pre-meal socializing. An emergency call from our European security team delayed me, and by the time I pulled into the familiar circular driveway, it was nearly 4. Several luxury cars lined the drive: my father's German sedan, my brother's Italian sports car, and various vehicles belonging to extended family. Standing on the doorstep of my childhood home, I took a deep breath and rang the bell. My mother answered, her face registering momentary shock at my punctuality before settling into her social smile. "Josiah, you made it. We've already started dinner. You know your father doesn't like to wait." I stepped into the foyer, beginning to remove my wool overcoat, when my father's voice carried from the dining room. "Is that Josiah finally gracing us with his presence? Didn't know they let dropouts in here." A few relatives laughed my Uncle Henry's distinctive chuckle, Cousin Stephen's snicker, someone else I couldn't identify. My mother's smile tightened, but she said nothing in my defense. I finished removing my jacket, hung it carefully in the hall closet, and walked toward the dining room. 20 pairs of eyes turned to watch my entrance. I nodded politely and took the only empty seat at the far end of the table, next to a cousin's young child and opposite an elderly great-aunt whose name I couldn't recall. "Now that everyone's here," my father announced with pointed emphasis, "let's continue our meal." And just like that, I was 10 years old again, arriving late to dinner because I'd lost track of time while building a computer from salvaged parts, facing my father's disapproval and the family's judgment. Only I wasn't that child anymore. I was Josiah Reed, CEO of Quantum Shield Technologies, and for the first time in that house, I felt no need to apologize for being exactly who I was. The Thanksgiving table looked like something from a glossy magazine: spread fine china, crystal glasses, silver candelabras casting a warm glow over the perfectly arranged food. My mother had always been meticulous about presentation, and today was no exception. The 20-pound turkey glistened at the center, surrounded by traditional sides served in family heirloom dishes. I helped myself to small portions as platters were passed, nodding thanks but remaining quiet as conversations flowed around me. From my position at the far end of the table, I had a perfect vantage point to observe the family dynamics I'd been removed from for so long. My father dominated the conversation from the head of the table, holding court on economic policy and the state of higher education. My mother sat at the opposite end, occasionally adding elegant commentary or directing servers who'd been hired for the occasion. Between them stretched the hierarchy of family status, with the most favored relatives closest to my parents, and status diminishing with distance. My sister Amelia sat at my father's right hand, the position of honor. Beside her was her new husband Nathan, a thoughtful-looking man with glasses and a genuine smile that seemed out of place among the practiced social expressions around him. My brother Lucas and his wife occupied the next most prestigious positions, followed by my father's brother, Uncle Henry, and his family, then various cousins, more distant relatives, and finally me at the outer edge of the family circle, both literally and figuratively. Amelia's team just received a $3 million research grant, my father announced proudly during a lull in conversation. The youngest principal investigator in the institution's history. My sister smiled modestly. "It's a collaborative effort, Dad. I'm just part of an amazing team." "Nonsense," my father insisted. "They wouldn't have gotten that grant without your work on targeted immunotherapy. Don't downplay your achievements." The irony wasn't lost on me. My father, who had dismissed my achievements my entire life, couldn't tolerate his favorite child showing humility. "And Lucas just made partner," my mother added. 5 years ahead of schedule. My brother raised his glass in acknowledgement as congratulations flowed from around the table. "The Reed tradition of excellence continues," my father said, lifting his wine glass in a toast. His eyes skipped over me completely as he surveyed his successful children. My mother, perhaps feeling a twinge of guilt, attempted to include me in the conversation. "Josiah, how have you been? Still living in the city?" Her question had the artificial brightness she reserved for difficult patients. "Yes, still in the city," I confirmed. "And you're still working with computers?" she probed. "Still in tech," I agreed. "What exactly do you do?" asked my Uncle Henry, using the same tone he might use to ask a child about a crayon drawing. "I work in cybersecurity." "For which company?" he pressed. "My own." This raised a few eyebrows, though most seemed to assume I meant freelance work or a small one-person operation. "Well," Uncle Henry said patronizingly, "if you ever want something more stable, my friend Roger is always looking for IT support staff. Entry-level, of course, but it comes with benefits." I nodded politely. "I'll keep that in mind." My cousin Stephen, always eager to emphasize his own success, jumped in. "Speaking of careers, I ran into Patrick Donnelly last week. Remember him from high school, Josiah? He was in your year. He's a senior investment banker now. Beautiful home in Back Bay, wife, 3 kids. Some people really maximize their potential." The implication that I had failed to do so hung in the air. My brother Lucas offered what he probably thought was a supportive comment. "You know, Josiah, you actually look well. I was worried with your unconventional choices that you might be struggling. Glad to see you're getting by." "Thanks," I said simply, taking another bite of turkey to avoid further comment. The conversation mercifully moved on to other topics: politics, real estate prices, someone's recent European vacation. I ate quietly, answering direct questions with minimal responses but otherwise content to observe. The child beside me was actually better company than most of the adults, showing me her drawing of a turkey with rainbow feathers. It wasn't until dessert, my mother's famous pumpkin and pecan pies, served with fresh whipped cream, that Nathan, my sister's husband, engaged me directly. He had moved to my end of the table, taking an empty seat across from me. "Amelia mentioned you work in tech security," he said, his interest seeming genuine rather than performatively polite. "That's actually adjacent to my field. I'm in fintech, The security challenges keep our team up at night. For the first time that evening, I found myself in a conversation worth having. Nathan asked intelligent questions about current security threats, shared some of the challenges his company faced, and actually listened to my responses. The biggest vulnerability in most systems isn't the technology, I explained, warming to the subject. It's human behavior. You can have the most sophisticated security protocols in the world, but if someone shares their password or clicks a suspicious link, those protections mean nothing. Nathan nodded enthusiastically. Exactly. We just implemented a new security system that's supposedly cutting edge, but getting people to follow basic security hygiene is the real battle. What system did you implement? I asked, genuinely curious. It's from a company called Quantum Shield, he replied. Completely transformed our approach. The system actually adapts to user behavior patterns to identify anomalies. Brilliant design. I kept my expression neutral despite the surge of pride. Sounds innovative. It is. Our tech team says it's revolutionary. The company's CEO is something of a mystery man, though brilliant but private. Goes by JR, rarely makes public appearances. Completely transformed our parent company after the acquisition. Some of my colleagues were skeptical about reporting to a new executive team, but this guy apparently has an incredible vision for the industry. Several family members had begun listening to our conversation, perhaps surprised to see someone engaging so earnestly with the family disappointment. Really turned the company culture around too, Nathan continued. Created all these opportunities for people with unconventional backgrounds. One of our best security analysts is a former artist with no formal tech education who got hired through their apprenticeship program. My sister Amelia had migrated toward our conversation, looking slightly annoyed that her husband was spending so much time talking to me. Nathan works for FinSecure Global, she interjected, recently acquired by a larger tech firm, but he's been promoted twice since the transition. He's on track for senior management. Nathan smiled awkwardly at her obvious attempt to redirect the conversation toward his success. The acquisition was actually a great move for us. Much more innovative company culture. Sounds like you enjoy your work, I said. I do. Best job I've had. Where did you say you work, Josiah? The moment had arrived without my planning it. I could give another vague answer, but something in me, perhaps Maya's advice to be my whole self, pushed toward honesty. Quantum Shield Technologies, I said simply. Nathan's expression was puzzled at first, then shifted to confusion as he processed my words. Wait, you work at Quantum Shield? In which department? I founded it. I'm the CEO. Nathan stared at me, his fork frozen midway to his mouth. He blinked rapidly, looked me over again as if seeing me for the first time, then said in a voice that carried across the suddenly quiet table, Wait, you're my CEO? You're JR? The room went dead silent. 20 pairs of eyes locked onto me with expressions ranging from disbelief to shock. My father's wine glass stopped halfway to his lips. My mother's hand flew to her pearl necklace. My brother Lucas sat up straighter, reassessing me with calculating eyes. Yes, I confirmed. My voice calm. I am. The silence lasted approximately 5 seconds before erupting into chaos. My father choked slightly on his wine. My mother's hand trembled as she set down her dessert fork with a clatter. Uncle Henry's mouth opened and closed without producing sound. Cousin Stephen turned an interesting shade of red. Nathan broke the silence. But that's... You founded a $200 million company? You're that J.R. Reed? Before I could respond, he continued, excitement overtaking his shock. The algorithm that powers our entire security infrastructure, that's your creation? The adaptive defense system? The predictive threat analysis? I nodded. Holy shit, he said, then immediately glanced apologetically at my mother for the profanity. Sorry, Mrs. Reed, but, wow, my father found his voice. Josiah, what is he talking about? Nathan answered before I could. Mr. Reed, your son is a legitimate genius in cybersecurity. His company protects half the financial institutions in the country, government agencies, healthcare systems. Our entire digital infrastructure would be vulnerable without his innovations. He's revolutionized the entire approach to threat prevention. My father's expression shifted from confusion to calculation in an instant. "Well," he said, his voice taking on a proud tone that had never been directed at me before, "we always knew Josiah had potential. Different learning style, but brilliant in his own way. I encouraged him to pursue his strengths." My mother quickly joined in. "We always believed in you, Josiah, even when you chose an unconventional path." The blatant revisionism was almost impressive. My uncle, who minutes earlier had offered me an entry-level position out of pity, now looked at me with newfound respect bordering on obsequiousness. "Quantum Shield, of course. I read about them in the Wall Street Journal. Remarkable growth trajectory. Should have made the connection with the name." Cousin Stephen's earlier smugness had evaporated completely. "So you're actually successful?" The concept seemed to confound him. My brother Lucas, ever the attorney, was already considering the networking possibilities. "We should grab lunch soon, Josiah. My firm represents several tech companies. Perhaps there are synergies to explore." The questions came rapid fire after that, with relatives who had barely acknowledged my presence now desperate for details. "How many employees do you have? What's the company valued at? Are you planning an IPO? Do you have a house in the city? Are you seeing anyone? Why didn't you tell us?" I answered minimally, neither boasting nor diminishing my accomplishments. Yes, the company was doing well. No, I wasn't currently planning to go public. Yes, I had a nice place in the city. No, I wasn't seeing anyone seriously at the moment. I had a demanding career. As for why I hadn't told them, I simply said, it never came up. The truth, of course, was more complicated. I hadn't told them because their validation wasn't what drove me. And perhaps in some corner of my heart, I'd wanted them to show interest in me, just me, Josiah, without the trappings of success. As dessert concluded and people moved to the living room for coffee, my sister pulled me aside into our father's study, a room I had rarely been allowed to enter as a child. "Why didn't you tell me?" Amelia demanded, her expression a complex mix of hurt, amazement, and something that looked suspiciously like jealousy. "I'm your sister. When would I have told you, Amelia? The last time we spoke was at Christmas last year. You talked about your research for 15 minutes and asked me exactly one question about my life. That's not fair. We've all been busy." "Yes, we have. The difference is that I've always been expected to keep up with your accomplishments and Lucas's career moves. No one has ever shown the slightest interest in mine. That's because we thought she stopped herself. You thought I was a failure. I finished for her. The family dropout. The cautionary tale about what happens when you don't follow the prescribed path. She had the grace to look embarrassed. We were worried about you. A college degree is important. For some careers, yes. For what I do, practical skills and innovation matter more than credentials. And Nathan works for you." She seemed to be still processing this fact. "My husband reports to my little brother. Technically, he's several levels down in the organizational chart. But yes, Quantum Shield acquired FinSecure Global last year. Their security infrastructure needed a complete overhaul. He loves his job," she said quietly. "Says it's the best company culture he's ever experienced. That was you?" I nodded. "I built the kind of company I wish had existed when I was starting out. We hire for talent and potential, not pedigree." Nathan joined us then, still looking slightly starstruck. I can't believe I've been telling my brother-in-law about how amazing my CEO is without realizing they're the same person. Despite everything, I found myself smiling. Nathan's enthusiasm was genuine, untainted by the complicated family dynamics swirling around us. "You've done excellent work implementing the security protocols," I told him. "Your team's adaptation rate is among the highest in the company." He beamed at the praise. "Thank you, that means a lot coming from you. I have so many questions about the underlying architecture when you have time." As Nathan launched into a technical question, my father appeared in the doorway. His expression was difficult to read, a mixture of the authority figure I'd grown up fearing and something new, uncertainty. "Josiah, a word, please." Nathan and Amelia excused themselves, leaving me alone with my father in his study. He closed the door and took a seat behind his massive desk, the same position from which he'd delivered countless lectures on my inadequacies throughout my childhood. "Why didn't you tell us about your company?" he asked, his tone suggesting I had deliberately deceived him. "Would it have mattered?" I countered. "Would it have changed how you see me or just what you think I'm worth?" His eyebrows drew together. "That's unfair. We've always wanted success for you." "No," I corrected him. "You wanted a specific kind of success, the kind that comes with degrees from prestigious universities and traditional career paths, the kind Lucas and Amelia achieved. We wanted you to have a solid foundation. Structure and education are important. For some people, not for everyone, not for me." He was quiet for a moment, fingers steepled in the gesture I remembered from childhood discussions of my academic shortcomings. "Clearly you've done well for yourself," he finally conceded. "I suppose I should congratulate you." The words should have felt like victory. Instead, they left me empty. This wasn't really about my success. It was about my father's inability to see beyond his narrow definition of achievement. "I didn't come here for congratulations," I told him. "I came because we're family, and I thought that might still mean something beyond measuring each other's accomplishments." Before he could respond, my mother entered without knocking a rite apparently reserved for her alone. "Josiah," she said, tears glistening in her eyes. "I had no idea, all this time, we thought." She trailed off. "That I was struggling? Barely getting by? A cautionary tale about the importance of education?" She had the grace to look ashamed. "We were wrong, and I'm sorry we didn't see your potential." The apology seemed sincere, but it came too late, and for the wrong reasons. They weren't sorry for dismissing me, they were sorry for missing the signs of my financial success. "I should get going," I said, standing up. "Early meeting tomorrow." "But you just got here," my mother protested. "There's so much to talk about. Your company, your life." "My company has existed for 7 years," I pointed out. "My life has been happening all along. The only thing that's changed today is your perception of its value." My father stood as well. "Don't be dramatic, Josiah. We're trying to connect with you." "No," I corrected him. "You're trying to connect with the successful CEO you just discovered. But that's only part of who I am, and it's not the part that needed your support all these years." I walked out of the study, through the living room where relatives attempted to engage me with newfound interest, and retrieved my coat from the hall closet. Nathan caught up with me at the door. "Are you leaving?" I was hoping we could talk more. "Monday at the office," I told him. "Bring your ideas about the firewall protocols you mentioned. They sound promising." He grinned. "Will do, boss." As I drove away from my childhood home, complex emotions swirled through me. There was a certain satisfaction in the shock on their faces, yes. But more prominently, I felt a profound sadness for the years of connection lost to rigid expectations and conditional approval. Back in my penthouse apartment, looking out at the city lights, I called Maya. "So," she asked, "how was it?" "Eventful," I replied, and began to tell her everything. Monday morning arrived with a fresh layer of snow and an inbox full of messages from relatives who had suddenly discovered my email address. I ignored them as I rode the elevator to our headquarters on the 32nd floor of a downtown high-rise. The office was designed to reflect our company values: open, collaborative spaces balanced with private areas for focused work, cutting-edge technology alongside comfortable gathering spots. Natural light streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows. The space looked nothing like the traditional corporate environments my father admired, with their rigid hierarchies and closed doors. Lisa, my executive assistant for the past 4 years, greeted me with her usual efficiency and a knowing smile. "Interesting weekend?" she asked, handing me my schedule for the day. "What makes you say that? You've received 17 LinkedIn requests from people with your last name since Friday, and Nathan Cooper from FinSecure has been calling every half hour this morning." News traveled fast. "Let's start with Nathan. Send him up when he arrives." As I settled into my office, I could feel curious glances from the staff. By mid-morning, it became clear that the story had spread throughout the company. The mysterious J.R. Reed had been revealed as the brother-in-law of a mid-level manager from an acquired company. At 11, Nathan arrived for our scheduled meeting, looking slightly nervous but excited. "Is this weird?" he asked as soon as my office door closed. Because it feels a little weird. I had to smile. A bit. But professionally, nothing changes. Your work stands on its own merits. Amelia is freaking out, he admitted. She spent the weekend Googling you and reading every article about quantum shields she could find. She had no idea. Few people make the connection between J.R. Reed, the CEO, and Josiah Reed, the college dropout. Nathan nodded. I get why you kept a low profile now. Must be strange having everyone suddenly see you differently. It's revealing, I acknowledged. The same people who dismissed me now want to claim connection. For what it's worth, Nathan said, I think what you've built here is incredible. Not just the technology, but the culture. My team feels valued for their contributions, not their credentials. That's rare. We spent the next hour discussing his ideas for improving client-side security protocols, a productive conversation that momentarily allowed me to forget the family complications. That afternoon, my management team requested a meeting. 8 of my top executives filed into the conference room, looking uncertain. We've heard some rumors, began Marcus, my COO and longest-serving executive, about your brother-in-law and a revelation at Thanksgiving. I nodded. Nathan Cooper is indeed my brother-in-law, though I didn't know that until recently. His identity doesn't change his position or responsibilities. It's not about Nathan, clarified Veronica, our head of HR. It's about the sudden personal attention. Your privacy has always been a cornerstone of our company culture. We're concerned about how this might change things. Their concern was valid. My deliberate anonymity had shaped our corporate identity. We let our work speak for itself, rather than building around a celebrity CEO. My commitment to our company values hasn't changed, I assured them. This personal connection becoming known doesn't alter our direction or philosophy. They seemed relieved, and we moved on to regular business matters. But as the week progressed, the ripple effects of Thanksgiving continued. Wednesday brought an unexpected visitor to our reception area. My father, dressed in a formal suit that seemed out of place among our casually dressed employees, had arrived unannounced and was insisting on seeing me. Security called up, clearly confused. There's a William Reed here claiming to be your father. He's not on the approved visitor list. I considered denying the visit, but decided that would only postpone the inevitable. Send him up. My father looked distinctly uncomfortable as he was escorted through our open office layout. His eyes took in the casual dress code, collaborative spaces, and distinctly non-hierarchical environment with poorly concealed disapproval. This is different, he commented as he entered my office. It works for us, I replied, not offering him a seat immediately. A small assertion of control I couldn't help but make. He remained standing, examining the space, the glass walls, modern furniture, and the view of the city beyond. Impressive operation you have, much larger than I expected. I finally gestured toward a chair. Did you need something specific, Dad? I have a meeting in 20 minutes. He sat stiffly. I've been thinking about our conversation, about your company. I have some thoughts that might be valuable. Business strategies, investment considerations, tax structures. The presumption was so typical that I almost laughed. My father, who knew nothing about my industry or company, assumed his academic knowledge of economics qualified him to advise me on running a business I'd built from nothing. We have financial advisors, investment strategists, and tax specialists, I told him. Multiple teams of them, actually. But the perspective of an economics professor with 30 years of experience would be interesting in an academic context, I interrupted gently. But we're operating in a highly specialized field that requires specific expertise. His expression hardened. I see. Too good for your old man's advice now. That's not what this is about. It's about respecting professional boundaries. Would you want me walking into your classroom and suggesting how to teach economics? Before he could answer, my phone buzzed. Lisa's message read, Your mother is now in reception. The situation was becoming absurd. Apparently Mom's here too. My father looked surprised. Laura came? She wasn't planning to. I asked Lisa to send her up as well. Minutes later, my mother entered, looking around with the same evaluating gaze my father had used, though her expression held more wonder than judgment. Josiah, she breathed. This is where you work? It's magnificent. Mom, Dad, I said firmly. While I appreciate your interest, I'm in the middle of a workday. We have hundreds of employees and clients who depend on our services. I can't drop everything for an impromptu family visit. We're just trying to be part of your life, my mother said, looking hurt. Now that we understand what you've built, that's the problem, I interrupted. You're not interested in being part of my life. You're interested in being part of my success. There's a difference. My father bristled. That's unfair. Your drive, your work ethic, where do you think those came from? The values we instilled in you contributed to what you've achieved. There was a kernel of truth there I couldn't deny. My father's relentless standards and my mother's perfectionism had indeed shaped my determination, though not in the way they'd intended. I need to establish some boundaries, I said firmly. Personal visits to my workplace aren't appropriate without advance notice. Family matters should be handled outside of business hours. And my company isn't suddenly a family enterprise open to everyone's input. My mother looked crestfallen. My father's expression wavered between offense and a grudging respect for my assertiveness. We can discuss this further at dinner sometime, I offered as a compromise. But right now, I need to prepare for my next meeting. After they left, I wasn't surprised to receive a flood of messages from other family members. Amelia wanted to discuss potential research collaborations between her medical team and our data security division. Lucas suggested his law firm could handle our corporate legal needs. Cousins inquired about job openings, investment opportunities, and various forms of assistance. The most uncomfortable request came from Uncle Henry, who had pivoted from offering me an entry-level position to asking for a small business loan of $500,000 for an unspecified venture. I established a clear policy. Professional inquiries would be directed through proper channels like any other potential partner or employee. Personal loans and investments were off the table. Family connection would neither advantage nor disadvantage anyone seeking to work with Quantum Shield. The boundaries were necessary, but created tension. My mother called frequently, oscillating between genuine attempts to connect and not-so-subtle hints about family members' needs. My father sent formal emails outlining his thoughts on corporate strategy, which I politely acknowledged but didn't implement. The most challenging moment came when a major client meeting was interrupted by my mother arriving unannounced in the lobby, insisting she just wanted to bring me lunch and see where I worked. The receptionist, recognizing the Reed name, wasn't sure how to handle the situation. I had to excuse myself from the meeting to address it, finding my mother standing in reception with a homemade lunch that seemed like an attempt to reclaim a maternal role she had never fully occupied. "Mom," I said quietly, leading her to a private area. I explained that I need you to respect my workplace boundaries. You wouldn't walk into an operating room during surgery to bring food to a colleague. "That's different," she protested. "I'm your mother, and this is my company. Hundreds of people depend on the work we do here. I need you to understand that." The conversation was difficult, but necessary. Gradually, over the following weeks, a new understanding began to form. My family started to recognize that while I was open to rebuilding our relationship, that relationship would have to account for who I actually was, not who they had wanted me to be, and not defined by what I had achieved. 6 months after the Thanksgiving revelation, I sat in a comfortable office in Back Bay, across from Dr. Eleanor Winters, family therapist. To my left sat my father, to my right, my mother. This was our 4th session together, a condition I'd set for continuing to rebuild our relationship. "William," Dr. Winters said gently, "could you repeat what Josiah just shared, in your own words, so I know you heard him?" My father shifted uncomfortably. At 72, he remained imposing back straight, expression serious, every bit the distinguished professor. But these sessions had revealed vulnerability beneath the authoritarian exterior. Josiah said. He began hesitantly, that my focus on traditional achievement made him feel that his worth was conditional on meeting specific expectations, that my disapproval of his learning differences felt like rejection of who he fundamentally is. "And how does hearing that make you feel?" prompted the therapist. My father's hands tightened on the armrests. Defensive, initially, We wanted what was best for him. But, he paused, the admission clearly difficult. I can acknowledge that my rigid definition of success left no room for different paths, including his. It wasn't a complete transformation. My father would likely always believe in the primacy of traditional education and established career paths. But his willingness to acknowledge the harm his approach had caused represented significant progress. My mother, who had been more receptive to therapy from the beginning, reached over to squeeze my hand. "I should have stood up for you more," she said. "Defended your differences instead of trying to fix them." These sessions were sometimes painful but ultimately healing. We were learning to see each other as complete people, flawed, complex, and worthy of respect despite our differences. Outside of therapy, other relationships were evolving too. Nathan had become both a valued colleague and friend. Initially concerned about potential nepotism accusations, he'd considered transferring to a different department. But his work spoke for itself, and he'd recently been promoted to head his division based on objective performance metrics. My relationship with Amelia had improved significantly. After some initial jealousy and adjustment, she'd come to respect my achievements on their own terms. We now had monthly dinners where shop talk was banned, focusing instead on rebuilding the sibling connection that had been overshadowed by competition and parental expectations. Even Lucas, always the most traditionally successful sibling, had developed a new appreciation for my unconventional path. His law firm didn't handle our corporate work. I maintained strict professional boundaries, but we'd found common ground in our shared experiences growing up under our parents' expectations. Quantum Shield continued to flourish. We'd expanded to over 700 employees globally, with offices in 12 cities. Our client list included government agencies, healthcare systems, financial institutions, and technology companies of all sizes. The valuation had more than doubled, though we remained private, allowing us to maintain our core values without shareholder pressure. My most meaningful initiative, however, was the Reed Foundation for Neurodivergent Innovation, a nonprofit that provided resources, mentorship, and funding for entrepreneurs whose brains worked differently. We offered scholarships for unconventional learners, supported alternative education programs, and funded research into different learning styles. The Foundation's flagship program was a mentorship and incubator, specifically for college dropouts with promising tech ideas, giving them the support, guidance, and seed funding I'd struggled to find in my early days. Several successful companies had already emerged from the program, founded by brilliant individuals who, like me, had been written off by traditional educational systems. My personal life had found better balance too. While work remained important, I'd learned to create space for relationships and personal growth. Maya remained my closest friend, but I had expanded my circle to include people who knew me as Josiah the person, not JR the CEO. I'd even started dating again, nothing serious yet, but open to the possibility of partnership with someone who valued me for my whole self, not my achievements or position. As spring turned to summer, my parents accepted my invitation to dinner at my home, a penthouse, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. It was their first visit to where I lived, a step toward knowing me as I actually was. My mother examined family photos displayed on a shelf, pictures with friends, the Quantum Shield team, mentees from the Foundation. "You've built a beautiful life," she said softly. "So different from what we imagined for you, but beautiful nonetheless." My father stood by the window, looking out at the city where I'd made my mark without his guidance or approval. "I was wrong," he said, the words clearly difficult for him, "about your potential, about what success could look like for you." The admission wasn't dramatic or tearful. It was quiet, genuine, and enough. We weren't a perfect family. Years of hurt couldn't be erased by months of effort, but we were learning a new way to be connected, one based on acceptance rather than expectation, on seeing each other clearly rather than through the distorting lens of predetermined success. That evening, after my parents left, I reflected on the journey from dismissed dropout to respected entrepreneur, from family disappointment to someone finding peace on his own terms. Success hadn't come from proving my worth to others, but from building something meaningful that aligned with my unique abilities and values. The greatest achievement wasn't the company valuation or industry recognition. It was finding the courage to be authentically myself in a world that had tried to force me into a mold that never fit, and perhaps in the process, helping others find that same courage. Have you ever been underestimated by the people who should have believed in you most? How did you respond? Did you try to prove them wrong, or find your own path to success on your terms? Drop a comment below sharing your experience, and if this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to hear more stories about finding success against the odds. Remember, the most powerful validation comes not from others' approval, but from building a life that honors your authentic self. Thank you for listening, and may you find the courage to follow your unique path, whatever form it takes.